23 days of Halloween. Day 1. 30 short, scary stories. When I was younger, around 8 or 9 years old, I went over to my best friend's house for a sleepover. Her parents had recently gone through a messy divorce, and her mom reached out to mine and thought it was a good idea that she had some friends to spend the night, since she was apparently experiencing frequent night terrors. I didn't find this out until later on, of course. We'll refer to her as L. So there's about 6 of us, and we're in L's attic, spending the night. After all the junk food and gossip, we decided to sleep since it was around 3 a.m. Right before deciding to sleep, Elle mentioned the reason why her parents were getting a divorce is because her dad cheated on her mom with the mom's hairdresser, and the mom kicked him out and changed all the locks. She said she was scared of him showing up because of how loud he would always yell. I felt so sorry for her having to go through all of that. We all tried to make her feel better and safe, but then decided that it was time to sleep. I'm usually the last one to fall asleep, so as I was drifting off, I feel someone nudging my shoulder, asking me if I'm okay. I said, yeah, I'm fine. Why? Still with my eyes closed. The person says, wake up. Don't sleep yet. I can't sleep. So I open my eyes to see Elle standing above me with her eyes closed. I told her she already looked like she was asleep and to go back to bed because I'm too sleepy. She nudged my shoulder again and then started crying loudly, then walked over to the side of her attic and went back in her bed. I looked around thinking everybody was awake, or that they would wake up for sure, but no one did, and she stopped crying as soon as she got in bed. I stayed there frozen for so long thinking she would wake up again or do something different. Then I got worried, so I walked over to her side and happened to look outside the window to see a man standing by a tree in their front yard. Just standing, in all black, looking like he was waiting. I never made it to her side to check on her. I sprinted back to where I was and just sat there. Needless to say, I never slept that night. And to this day, I'm still confused as to why no one else woke up when she cried, and why she made it to my side without making any noise, seeing as the floor creaked a lot when people moved on it. She had no idea what I was talking about in the morning. Her mom denied everything. Felt like I was going crazy until my mom explained her night terrors to me. She freaked when I told her about the man waiting outside. We assumed it was Elle's dad, but we can't say for sure who it was. Number 29. When my daughter was 6 weeks old, I woke up to the inside laundry door banging. Now, my husband only left the laundry window open to avoid condensation when the dryer was on, so I assumed it was the wind. But the baby was fussing, so I got up to change her. I had this really bad feeling, but she was fussing, So after hesitating at the bedroom door, I went to change her anyway because I figured I was just paranoid, bad dream or something. As I step out the door, I hear this really loud bang. I stuck my head around the corner, and sure enough, it was the laundry door. So I finish changing Bubs, get her settled into bed again, and go and shut the laundry window. Go back to bed. When I got up the next morning, I found muddy footprints all over the lounge room carpet, and our Wii and some other stuff was stolen. I realized that when I got up, I disturbed whoever had broken into our house. If I hadn't hesitated at the door, I would have run right into them. God knows what might have happened, and I have nightmares about it to this day. Number 28. Seeing the aftermath of blood and matter of my father's tragic death. He was hit by a car while walking on the street and killed instantly. I got to the scene as fast as I could, but his body was already bagged up and everything. Things were scattered, his clothing was literally scraped off of him, and he was drugged down the street. Shoes, miscellaneous things that were in his pockets, all over the place. Fucked me up for a while. It's been 3 years, and I convince myself I'm doing all right now, and I can finally talk about it. But when I got there on that scene, I went into a very dark place that I didn't leave for nearly 2 years. Number 27. One night I was alone during a storm. I kept getting these really nasty feelings in the pit of my gut that someone was there. So I went upstairs, opened the front door, locked the screen door, then shut and locked and chained the front door. That way if someone wanted inside, they're gonna make a hell of a lot of noise trying to do so, and it'd give me time to grab a gun and call the police. So I feel a little better. But the feeling won't go away. And it keeps getting worse. It got so bad, I wanted to go grab the shotgun and have it right next to me. Instead, I told myself that I was being paranoid because of the storm. I just told myself that it was riling me up. After a while, it got to the point that I didn't even want to be in the house, gun or not. I went to bed and I couldn't sleep. Eventually I passed out, but I woke up about an hour later to my mother questioning me about why I had been out in the storm, stomping around the yard. I went outside and found boot prints all around the house. Whoever it was had followed me as I went from room to room and stayed still long enough in the front of the windows to sink into the mud. That day I put up vinyl curtains in all the windows so nobody can see in, even if the lights are on. Added alarms to the windows, put door jamb armor on all the doors, PVC pipe in the track of the sliding door, you name it. I made sure that there's a phone and some sort of weapon in each and every room of the house. It cost a hell of a lot of money, but I refuse to be a victim. I hate to think of what could have happened if whoever it was had gotten inside the house. Honestly, I don't know what or who it was. I don't know why they were there, and I no longer ignore my instincts. I regularly check to make sure everything is always in the right place. Number 26. I've got one. I worked security for extra money. One day, one of my regulars was on assignment overnight at a metal fabrication factory. One of the primary reasons I was there was to ensure that no one broke in to steal all the valuable metal that was stocked on site, which was an occasional problem. That in turn involved checking the perimeter fence for damage at least once every shift. That couldn't be done effectively by camera. It instead required physically walking the fence. So it was that one night that I was walking the perimeter fence in the middle of a thunderstorm. My attention was on the beam that my flashlight illuminating the fence would protrude as I walked past. So I wasn't really focused on where I was walking, despite walking through grass that was a bit over my waist. Apparently, I just stepped awkwardly on a patch of particularly slick grass or mud as I was heading downhill. But before I knew what was happening, I had slid feet first into an open storm sewer. Some asshole had stolen the manhole cover recently, and the edges around the opening were wet with rain, mud, and all types of shit thanks to the storm. Let me just take a moment to explain this storm sewer. First of all, it was shaped just like an oblate. If you're not familiar with what that is, picture a concrete cell that is shaped like a jug, a small opening at the top with sides that slope inward to prevent someone from crawling out. In this case, the bottom was maybe 10 feet square, and the opening for the manhole was about twice the normal width in the center of the ceiling. There was no ladder attached, and the fall was maybe 20 feet down. At the bottom, the floor was sloped to form two trenches in the shape of a cross. There were sewer channels going in 4 directions, and they were only maybe a foot wide across and were blocked with metal grates. At the bottom there was debris, including a number of large broken pieces of rebar. There were several pieces that were pointing straight up. I definitely would have impaled myself on several jagged points of rusty metal had I hit the bottom. So, no way to escape. A long fall down, and probably a disabling injury at the bottom. I somehow caught myself by hooking the edge of the opening on my elbows as I fell in. I dropped my flashlight to the bottom of the pit before I stopped my momentum. So I had a great view of all that broken rebar below me while I was struggling to escape. As I tried to get another handhold, my cell phone skipped out of my pocket and hit the bottom. I felt like forever before I somehow pulled myself out of that opening. I doubt adrenaline could give me a considerable boost of strength, but Even so, I nearly lost my hold on the edge 3 times before I managed to scramble out. I was kinda just jerking my knees towards the opening and jumping. A couple inches thanks to the momentum, my free hand kept scrambling for something solid to grab onto, but I never really found anything. I'm honestly not sure exactly how I pulled myself out to the surface, besides the tension between the mud and the concrete with my hands and forearm. It felt like a miracle. All I could think of after I pulled myself out was how I wasn't due to be relieved for another 7 hours. 7 hours before anyone would even start wondering where I was that whole time. I might have been trapped at the bottom of the pit, impaled on some rods of rebar in the rain. I also wanted to kill whoever stole that manhole cover. Number 25. When my daughter was 3 years old, she stayed the night at a friend's house who had 2 little girls about the same age. They were all asleep, but my friend was in her room with the baby monitor. I get a call a little after 3 in the morning saying I need to come get her. Apparently my friend had heard the bedroom door where the girls were at open and close a few times, and then all 3 girls started screaming bloody murder at the exact same time. My daughter had a handprint-shaped bruise on her arm the size of an 8-year-old's hand. And there was no one there that could have made it. All 3 girls said that there was an old woman with the face of a monster standing in the doorway, and that she was opening and closing the door, and that a little girl was trying to wake my daughter because the old lady was going to hurt her. She's 6 years old now and still talks about this. My friend had paranormal hunters come out to their house a few times, and there were a few other incidents. And they were saying that ghosts lived on the property. One was an 8-year-old girl and one was an old woman. All I know is whatever happened to my daughter needs never happen again. Number 24. My cousin used to be a divorce lawyer in Arkansas. He was representing his wife. The husband was abusive, kinda crazy. Well, the husband started believing the wife was with my cousin. So he kidnapped my cousin, tied him up, put him in the basement, beat him, and dipped or dripped acid on him for 3 fucking days. On the 3rd day, the husband said he would go get the wife, make her watch the cousin die, then kill the wife. So the husband left. The cousin somewhat unties himself, got out of the house, rolled down the street until someone picked him up. The couple that found him were scared and dumped him into a Walmart parking lot and called 911. for anybody questioning whether or not it's true, I'm dumping the court case into the stream chat. Number 23. Watching my big dog get hit by a car and go flying through the air. I watched my dog get hit by a car and soar through the air while my neighbor's bigger dog got ran over and tumbled again and again by the same car at the same time. The bumpers were ripped off and pieces of the exhaust were all over the road. I was 10 years old. I was home alone and had to run into my neighbor's house to tell them that their dog was unconscious and lying in a pool of blood. Number 22. I was in Vegas last year with my brother. We both like to party hard, still in our 20s. Walking down the strip, I see two black guys with backpacks on. I know what that means. I say, damn, wish we had some weed. They immediately turn around, offer us other things as well, and we took down his number to get the other things later on in the night. Hours later, after tons and tons of booze and shit, we call this guy up for more. When we meet these two guys, they were on foot. The second time, though, we had to meet them in front of a hotel because they were driving, so he tells us to hop in for a few, so we can get what we need without people watching. Now, at this point, my brother and I are fucked up and don't realize what's happening until it starts to get dark. We had only been driving for 10 minutes, but we were obviously off the strip, away from the lights, people, away from everything. This guy is driving like a goddamn maniac with music blasting, so it was a bit distracting. My brother finally asks him where we're going. They say we're headed to a liquor store real quick, and then they'll drop us back off. But it seems like we're in the middle of nowhere. Finally realizing the situation we are in, we open our doors while we're stopped at a light and run to the only thing we see, a gas station. We flag down a cab that drove by a few minutes later, which he says is illegal. But we were obviously in need of help. After we told him what had happened, he calmly tells us there is no liquor store over here. It was the worst and the best feeling ever. We narrowly escaped God knows what and stayed silent for the rest of the night. Don't get into cars with strangers, especially when you're under the influence. Number 21. I was on a business trip from San Francisco to Los Angeles. Last day in town. I finish early and head to, the beach. Stop by a payphone, call the airline. May I please have a later flight so I can watch the sunset from the beach? The airline lady says, it's done. It was a different time, I know. Later that night, I get home and my wife is laughing her ass off. I knew you weren't dead, she kept saying, through laughing. Turns out, the owners of the company I worked for, the same guys that had bought the original ticket for the flight, had been calling her telling her how sorry they were for her loss. My supervisor was in tears, and the wife is laughing, telling them that I'm not dead. My original flight home was Southwest Airlines flight from the 80s, where a disgruntled baggage handler had gotten on the plane with a pistol and put a bullet in the backs of the heads of the two pilots. The plane crashed and burned, killing all on board. It made the sunset that I watched the best sunset of my life. Number 20. Moscow, 1993, when Yeltsin decided to fire upon the Duma. Just the amount of dead people that were laid out to be identified by their relatives, wailing mothers, wailing wives. The smell of burnt rubber and crackling glass underfoot. What struck me the most was how there would be a janitor next to some big-wig politician laying there side by side with their head propped up on the brick wall, all equal in death. That one scared me for a while, as of course my friend and I snuck out with our parents, knowing. I guess the lesson we learned is that at the end of the game of chess, all pieces go back in the box. I was around 10 in the early 90s. We've just moved to Moscow from a small town in Siberia and bought new furniture. Turns out the furniture store forgot one of the items and said that someone will drop it off tomorrow. Not uncommon in Russia. Kids were okay being home alone even at 10 years old. So I'm at home after school when two dudes knock on the door carrying a box saying that they are from the furniture store. They were not. I got tied up and roughed up, and they robbed the house clean, but left me alive. I was able to identify one of them a year later, while the other one was killed in a car accident. Karma's a bitch. The first guy got 7 years of hard labor, and I'm sure he's been releasing silent farts from the first day there. You'll get it if you think about it. I saw a man get shot pretty much point blank in the face in early 2000s. I was in a bar in Moscow, waiting for a friend, chatting with the bartender. I hear a commotion next to me, and as I see a guy take a step back, he whips out a gun, points it at a guy's face, and pulls the trigger. The guy just slumped and hit the floor. And that's when I saw the blood. Immediate ringing in my ears, screams, folks frozen, as we thought this guy would continue shooting. Turns out the guy was in the police force and shot this guy as he was part of some gang who had murdered another cop from his station. Well. Number 19. When I was a freshman in high school, my cousin was huge into JROTC and the Army, and was admitted to West Point. However, he was shot and killed the winter of his senior year in high school. He was buried in Army services dress. Fast forward to the summer. I was attending encampment as part of a Civil Air Patrol, which is like a week-long basic training for new cadets. At graduation, we're all sitting on the parade field in 90-degree Virginia summer heat when suddenly I feel ice cold. I looked across the field to the bleachers where our parents were sitting, and standing in front of the bleachers was a pale white figure in full army service dress, clearly blocking the view of quite a few people for the whole ceremony. Nobody else was standing. Nobody else asked him to sit, even though there were also people in uniform sitting down. I kept my eye on the figure the whole time, which stood completely still at parade rest for the entirety that I could see it. But after the pass and review was complete, and we returned to our spot on the other side of the field, the figure was gone. After the ceremony was over, I asked everyone in my flight if they had seen the figure, and everyone said they didn't see anyone fitting that description. To this day, I'm 100% sure it was my cousin coming back one last time to see me off. Number 18. I feel like this will get buried, but when I was in primary school, this man used to work on the playground. He'd just monitor the children and make sure everything was okay. He'd always invite me over for dinner, and used to talk about his wife, who was at home waiting for him to get back. He used to tell me about the dogs that he had, and say that I could feed them treats if I met them. I used to beg my mom to let me go to his house, and she would always outright refuse. I was bummed because his house sounded fun, and I wanted to meet his dogs, but my mom's word was the law, so I got over it. He somehow found out my address and sent me a Christmas card one year. Fast forward to when I'm in secondary school, and his name is all over the paper. Oh no. Sentenced to raping a 6-year-old girl. It also turned out that his wife had died years ago. I was only 8 when I knew him, but I still remember what he looked like, and I'll always be glad that my mom was so protective. Number 17. The creepiest thing that ever happened to me was when I was 5. My mom, my sister, and I were living in a small trailer in a rural town in Georgia. My sister and I went to bed, and a little while later my mom followed suit. Around 11 p.m., my mom heard me calling out, "Mama, Mama." She checked the bedroom and didn't see me in there. So she knew I sleepwalked, so she started checking the rest of the trailer. She didn't find me anywhere, and I had stopped calling her. She checked under the furniture, in the closets, the appliances. I like to hide in the dryer at that age. She even checked the kitchen cabinets. She eventually found me outside, standing in my underwear on the front porch. She never figured out how I got outside, as the front and back door were locked by handle and chain locks. The windows were shut, and were a type that can only be shut from the inside. Number 15. On April 18th of this year, I came home from work and began working on some homework. After 30 minutes of homework, my aunt entered my mother's bedroom and began screaming hysterically, ordering me to call 911. Once I was on the line with the operator, she asked me what the nature of the emergency was. I didn't quite know, so I entered my mother's bedroom to find her dead. She had a heart attack and was laying face down on the floor, wedged between her nightstand and the bed. The operator dispatched the paramedics, instructed me on how to perform CPR. In order to do so, I had to flip my mother onto her back. When I grabbed my mother's cold, lifeless arm, I realized that she couldn't be moved. She was wedged firmly between her bed and her nightstand, and what I later recognized to be rigor mortis had already set in. I was unable to move her stiff, dead body. And I'd never touched a dead body before. After the paramedics came and told me that nothing could be done, the medical examiner informed me, or a family member, that she couldn't be seen as she had been laying on her face for so long. It's assumed by my family that she hit her head on the way down, as her dentures were on the floor beside her. The combination of her head trauma and the fact that she had been dead for many hours has rendered her unviewable, as deemed by the officer from the medical examiner's office. To answer your question, the sight and feeling of my mother's deceased body is the most chilling thing that I have ever seen or experienced. Her memorial is this Sunday. Number 14. I went to see a movie with a friend of mine. It was dark when we got out of the movie, and she offered me a ride home, but it was pretty short of a walk, so I figured I'd head home on my own. It's a nice night after all. We live in a really safe town. Usually. So I start to walk home. I guess I should mention I'm a woman, and a particularly small one. About 2 blocks into my walk, I hear yelling and screaming / moaning. I look, and these 2 guys in hoodies are kicking something, but I can't see what because there's this short cement wall blocking my view. They shout something, not at me, and take off in the opposite direction. So I run to where they had been. I want to see what they were kicking, who they were kicking. It all happened so fast. I get there, and there's this homeless man. It's really dark, but he's obviously hurt bad. He has a blanket, He was clearly sleeping when these guys came up and attacked him. I actually recognized him, not by name, but it's a small town and I've seen him around. He gets up, grabs his blanket, looks around for a minute, and I try to talk to him. But he just can't really talk to me. He's quite mentally ill and has now been hit in the head, and he's just terrified. He takes a couple steps as I'm calling 911 and ends up under a streetlight. His head and face are covered in blood and some dirt caked over it, to the point where I can't see any skin on his face. He's way too spooked to let me try to help, and I'm explaining to 911 the situation, but mostly just begging for an ambulance. They want to know about the two guys, of course, but I didn't see them well, and I have this guy bleeding from the head in front of me. And then he starts walking. I have no way to stop him, so I just follow him for a little while behind, because I don't want to be extra thing that terrifies him, but I also need to update 911 where we are. We made it like 8 blocks before the fire truck intercepted us. I am shocked he makes it that far. No one else is out. 911 keeps wanting me to give more detailed description, which is the one point I lost it a little bit. He's the only guy covered in blood walking down the street. I cannot describe how relieved I was that the fire truck showed up at all. The police talked to me for a while, then they left. The guy had been transported to the fire truck, and the fire truck was off. All of a sudden, everyone was gone. They'd left me there alone. I took a step back to walk home, but now I was farther from home than when I started. I decided to call my friend, and she drove back and took me home. Smart girl. Number 13. I used to take care of a developmentally disabled man in a community protection program. He had to be kept away from people because of his sudden violent outbursts. His parents were rich and bought an old farmhouse on 10 acres or so about 4 miles out of town. He wanted to be away from the public, not forced into a psych ward. For 4 years, I worked there on a 56-hour shift. Same in, same out. Come in on Monday evening, leave on Wednesday afternoon. There were 2 of us on these shifts, and we were both supposed to be there the entire 56 hours. But because we were the most senior trainers on staff, we'd take turns doing home on 1 or 2 of the nights. After 3 years of being in that house, I had become comfortable with it despite being so isolated and overall kind of creepy. I would always stay up and watch TV until around midnight. My client was always locked in his room around 8 p.m. One night, at about 12:15 a.m., I turned the TV off and pulled the covers over myself to try and get some sleep on the nastiest futon ever. There was one window in the staff room, and it faced the back of the property and was about 6 feet off the ground. I had just started drifting to sleep when I heard the most blood-curdling woman scream from right outside the window. I popped up so fast that I nearly lost consciousness and had to steady myself in the doorway. The scream continued. and faded away. I grabbed a flashlight from the laundry room and threw open the back door, illuminating the area outside the window, and there was nothing. I ran along the perimeter of the house and saw nothing. I watched the sun come up the next morning, desperately glued to the TV, trying to distract myself from what happened. All the people I worked with there were much older than me, and there was no good reason to play a prank like that in the middle of January in Eastern Oregon. I'm sure there's no explanation, but it doesn't stop me from thinking about it all the damn time. Staying in that house was making him crazy. Number 12. I was a big Pee Wee Herman fan and loved it at first. In my room I had bunk beds, and I slept on the bottom bunk and on the top. I kept all my favorite toys and stuffed animals, and I'd often leave them in really weird formations after having battles and the like. But I always remembered to leave certain ones in certain places because they were my favorites. Nigga, I said Pee Wee Herman and I meant Pee Wee, and I'm not sure what Pee Wee is, so we're gonna look that shit up really quickly. Pee Wee, what the fuck? I don't know and I don't care. For the sake of the story, it's some manner of toy. Whatever. But I always remember to leave certain ones in certain places because they were my favorites. Namely, my Ninja Turtles and Pee Wee. A few months after getting this toy, though, I started to have some really terrible nightmares about it. Not the "are you afraid of the dark" kind of early 90s nightmares for kids, but truly graphic and horrible dreams. There was someone that had broken into our house and made me watch him torture my sister. And my parents while the doll just laughed. Scary shit. So I told my parents, and they immediately got rid of it. This apparently just meant that they hid it in the garage since I couldn't see the stuff stored up high anyway. A couple weeks later I woke up and all my Ninja Turtles were on the floor. Confusing. But maybe I shook the bed a bunch in my sleep. A few days later after this, my older sister woke up my parents screaming about a dream that she had just had. It was nearly identical to the dream that I had told them about, but I know she'd never heard about it. My parents knew, as well as my mother looked genuinely horrified. I got screamed at for telling my sister about such horrible things, but once it became clear that I really hadn't told her, my mom looked even more worried. I watched her go into the garage, grab Pee Wee, put him in a trash bag, and put him in the dumpster. For years I'd wake up and my stuffed animals would be in really odd places. In places I know I hadn't left them. In places I never would have left them. I was obsessed. When I was 12, I found the Pee Wee toy in a box in the garage. My mom said that my dad must have come home, seen it in the trash, and pulled it out. He doesn't remember ever doing that. He swears he didn't even know she threw it away, let alone tried to pull it out. But there it is. Number 11. I was home for summer from college, and my mother and brother had just headed out for a few day trip to visit a college. Okay. This meant I was to stay home and take care of my father. Something was wrong with Dad. Clearly wrong. But we couldn't tell. He had Parkinson's, but it was more than that. But we figured I could handle him on my own. This is when I came to the realization that something in his broken mind hated me. With a passion. He wouldn't listen to anything I said. Now I admit, I was pissed off, so I wasn't doing a terrific job, but even simple things like getting him food was an hour-long ordeal that ended with us shouting. This last time, I called Mom on the house phone because at least he'd listen to her. I gave him the phone, and I was on the other, yelling at each other through it even though we were 5 feet apart. Poor Mom trying to referee from a few 100 miles away. Finally, Dad hangs up his phone and hands it to me. Oh, he's done, thank God, I think. But then he tries to take the still active phone from my hand, which I refuse, and that's when it happens. It gives me chills to this day. A change came over him. It was subtle, but he stood slightly straighter. It was like for a moment someone else was in his body. He stared at me, and in the most calm, cold voice I have ever heard, said, "I'm going to kill you." There was no emotion behind it. There was no energy. He said it as though it were fact. I was stunned. Mom heard it over the phone. As I stood there, paralyzed, her voice broke through in a whisper. "Run." I threw the phone at Dad, rounded the corner, grabbed my keys. My car screamed out of the driveway. It was pure animal instinct for me at that point. I had to run. Because if I stayed there, Dad didn't really remember anything that happened. He was confused as to why I was suddenly gone. I had no idea what went on in his head at that moment. But I stared into something. Something I knew I needed to get away from. Number 10. We had a break-in the home I lived in as a child. I was about 5 or so. And I used to come home from school and I'd be alone as my sister was at school and my parents were at work. The house was at the bottom of a long driveway with a big-ass yard and a huge bush with a river behind it. So it was kinda isolated. But one day I come home from school, down the driveway as usual, went to unlock the gate and noticed that our front door was broken, but the gate wasn't. As I said, it was only 5. I was only 5, so I wasn't very smart. Wait a minute, nigga. I was 5 and I used to come home from school and I'd be alone? 5 years old? Don't read too much into this one, Kyle. So I wasn't very smart. I proceeded to open the gate to go in, and as I entered, I heard someone a few people's feet running out the back door. I went into the house and saw that the burglars had broken in through a back window and just took everything. The point of the story is that they were still in the house when I arrived. And when they heard the front gate opening, they fled out the back, as they probably thought it was my dad, who was a police officer. Had they known it was just a 5-year-old, who knows what would have happened to me. Makes my fucking blood run cold just thinking about it. Did I add that I live in South Africa? Oh my God. Number 9. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, we had this neighbor that would regularly try to invite me over for cake and candy, or to play with the dogs he owned. My parents didn't trust him, of course, so the invitations were declined. Years later, we learned that he regularly raped his 12-year-old stepdaughter and got her pregnant. When he went to trial, it was revealed that there were 4 other young girls in his past that he had abused. The guy used to decorate his house like a haunted mansion every Halloween, and kids would go crazy about it. I'm so glad that my parents wouldn't allow me to go there. Number 7. When my friend's dad was around 17 years old, he decided to go camping with about 8 or so of his friends. This took place in Wisconsin, in the forest. When they got on site, they decided to split up to collect some firewood in groups of 2 and meet back at the site in around 20 minutes. One group wasn't back right away, and since they were a couple, they were just assumed to be fornicating in some bushes, and cracked a couple of jokes about it. After around an hour, they decided they should probably go look for them, and headed off to search in the area they had been collecting wood. They saw behind a bush part of the girl's bloody shirt, and the man's shoes were lying scattered around the scene. They quickly rushed back to their car so they could drive to find the park ranger's office, which was about 5 miles away, and report the incident. However, they found that their gas had been siphoned, so they had no choice but to walk. On the way back to the office, they saw a semi pass by with one driver and 2 faces pressed up against the window. These faces my dad's friends believe to be the 2 friends begging for help. The 2 friends were reported missing and have never been found to this day. Number 6. My mom had a stalker for years. She was maybe in her early 30s. I was around 3 years old and my brother was around 1 when it started. My dad would leave for work in the morning, and as soon as he was gone, the calls would start coming in. She'd answer the phone, and some guy would be saying all the horribly sadistic and sexual things about what he wanted to do to my mom. She was beyond frightened, didn't know what to do. Sometimes the caller would describe that what she was wearing at that very minute, or describe what she was doing. My parents were struggling financially, so they couldn't just up and move, but my mom started spending more and more time at my dad's mother's house when he was away. The cops got involved, but they couldn't trace the call. Finally, they were able to save up enough money to move. I was about 6 by this time. The phone number was changed and unlisted in the phone book. This was around 1988, when everyone still used landlines. My mom never got another scary call, but she had nightmares about it for years. When I was little, I remember going into her bedroom in the morning, and she would be sobbing into her pillow. I didn't understand it at that point, but she explained later in life that she'd wake up from another nightmare and just shake and cry. A couple months after we moved, the cops informed us that they finally caught the guy It was our next door neighbor's 19-year-old son. He had been in the military but was discharged due to severe mental illness. I guess he was put into some sort of special security home that specializes in mental health. The lead investigator said that the son was obsessed with my mother. They found a box in his room full of a bunch of photographs candidly taken of her when she was out in the garden or playing with us kids in the yard. It chills me to the bone when I think about it now. Anything could have happened. When my dad was at work, and I'd have been too young to help her. Number 5. I was 8, and I woke up to an explosion of dogs barking and screaming coming from our backyard. Then the screams started trailing down the street. We get outside and my dog is chewing on a bloody shoe, and a bit of gym shorts were hanging off the backyard fence. We call the cops. They investigate. From the footprints, they could see the guy tried every window with my dog following. When he got to mine, the dog went full attack mode. The guy was picked up that night on an unrelated charge, but they put 2 and 2 together later and charged him. My dog allowed them to collect the gym shorts, but the shoe was his. He was happy and let the cops pet him as much as they liked. Animal control the next day went, drew a little blood for a rabies test, and that shoe, though, they gave back to the dog. Okay, that's cute. Number 3. During my senior year of high school, my best friend and I were at her house, which was way up in one of the canyons. She had a long, winding driveway. We had been there all day, and her mom had gone out, and she and I were supposed to go meet a couple friends in Hollywood that night. Anyway, we'd been goofing around all day, watching scary movies and whatnot, and we started to get ready. Her bathroom had one of those double sink deals, so she was near one and I was at the other. All of a sudden I get the creepiest feeling, like all of the hair on my arms and my neck starts standing up, and I have the sudden feeling of panic. To this day, it is the most terrified I've ever been. I was putting on eyeliner when it happened, and I caught her eye in the mirror and said, "We need to leave right now." I thought she'd be like, "What? You're being ridiculous," and what have you, but she said, "I know." My blood ran cold when she said it. We left so quickly that we just grabbed what was in front of us, we booked it out of the house and down the street, which we weren't supposed to be on because her mom had just had it repaved. Her car was parked down on the street. We rounded the curve in the driveway, and there was an SUV parked dead center in the middle of the street without its lights on. Suddenly, the lights turned on full blast. The SUV blared its horn and took off. We scrambled the rest of the way down, totally ruining the new paving. And we're getting into the car and calling the police when her mom pulled up right behind us. To this day, I don't know if it was a robber or what, but the fact that she and I both got this abrupt sense of dread at exactly the same time creeps me the fuck out. The likelihood there is that the robbers were actually already looking for a way in, and that SUV was the getaway car, and the fact that it blared its horn before it got out of there was to notify the other assholes trying to get into the house, if they weren't already in the house, that they needed to go. Holy shit. Number 2. When I was 16, my parents went out of town for a weekend. It was actually pretty sweet because I go to the king of the castle type mode when I'm there. So I get home that Friday night and just stick around, internet, video games, etc. Start watching TV around dusk. The way our living room was set up was there was a set of glass doors right next to the television that looked out to the back porch of the backyard. The backyard was surrounded by ivy that grew on a hill around a 45-degree angle. So I'm just mindlessly channel surfing and I see some movement outside. At first, I just dismiss it, thinking it's a bird or neighborhood cat or something. But then I notice that whatever is moving is way bigger than a bird or a cat. I go and put my face near the glass and stare into the backyard. And there's some dude just crouching in the ivy looking into the house. Our eyes meet, and he has somewhat of an oh shit moment and bolts out of the yard. Scared the shit out of me. Number 1. I was on a 15-hour bus trip from the Yucatan to Mexico with my family. It was late at night, and after several hours of driving, we stopped at a gas station to go to the bathroom, grab snacks, etc. It would have been like any other trip. However, I noticed that there was an unusual amount of police. When we got back on the bus, the driver informed us that the police had received a tip that our bus was being targeted for a robbery by Mexican bandits. And the police say they will escort us. We drove and drove for hours up a nauseatingly winding road on the side of a cliff. One of the police trucks are in front of us and one is behind us, armed to the T. I was on high alert, but after a while I dozed off. That was until the bus came to an abrupt stop. I remember peering out the front window and seeing a series of large rocks placed strategically across the road. Everything was dark, save for the rocks being illuminated by the bus lights. If the police were not here, here's what would have went down. Step 1. The bus driver would stop because of big rocks in the way of the bus. He'd get out of the bus, remove the rocks. Step 2. The Mexican bandits would kill the bus driver or hold him hostage. Step 3. The bandits would board the bus. Step 4. The bandits would rob and kill us, unless we were women, in which case we would probably be raped and then held ransom. I was 17 years old. I was a white female. I'm a halfie. Well, the rest of my family is Mexican, or looks Mexican. Even then I knew that something bad would definitely have happened to me if these police weren't here. Kidnapping for ransom would definitely not have been out of the question, and a rape was a high guarantee. We were in the middle of nowhere on a bloody fucking mountain, and if the policia weren't there, I wouldn't even be here telling this story. Special thanks to everybody who came out to the stream today. I want to thank my patrons for doing what they do. This thing never works. God damn it. Oh my God. I want to thank my sponsors for being... I'm probably going to turn Super Chat off, since we have people in here just paying YouTube to continue doing what they do. YouTube should be ashamed of themselves at this point. But I'm so stuck until we find another platform. That being said, I thank the patrons, I thank the sponsors, and I thank all of you for being here. This was day 1 of the 23 days of Halloween. Here's hoping you didn't hate it. See you tomorrow.